What's up, everybody? Welcome to a special episode of Climbing the Ladder. I'm your host, ChanmanV, and we got a show all about balance and the process of balancing today, and we got a whole array of people. This episode kind of took a different turn once David and you guys released that proposed changes this week, so we're definitely going to be talking a bit more about balance than we originally intended. But let me introduce the cast we got today. We've got a lot of folks. A lot of these folks that you know already, so I'm just going to go through it really fast because we only have about an hour today. We got ROOT.CatZ over here to my right, EG.Suppy, XMG.ToD, and EG.Xenocider. And of course, our guest today is Mr. David Kim from Blizzard, senior game designer. How's everybody doing?
Very good.
Great. How are you?
Good stuff. All right, so since we have an hour, I want to kind of lay out how we're going to do the show, or just the kind of parts of the show, and then we'll just get right to it. It's going to be broken up into three parts. First part's going to be all about the recent proposed changes. We're going to have each of these guys kind of ask David their questions, and then we're going to talk about general design, any design questions any of us have for David, and then we'll finish it off with really having David go through the beginning to end process of coming up with design and balance updates to the game. So, all right, let's start it off, guys. Who wants to go first? How about Xenocider? I'll let you go first since you're the youngest one here. You have any questions for David about the recent proposed changes? Which let me show you guys. They're right here. So, the proposed changes have to do with Overseer speed buff, combined mech and air upgrades, and then the Viper starting with full energy. Any questions for David in regards to those proposed changes?
Okay, so first thing, Viper. Okay, so the Viper change, I think we're trying to buff mech with the mech upgrades change, but the Viper change seems to be doing the opposite. But I don't actually think that mech is good at all in TVZ, so I'm actually going to ask the questions about the other changes. So the Overseer speed buff is basically making the Overseer a lot faster. But in engagements, like in a big 150 supply versus 150 supply engagements, you already know that the widow mines are going to be set there. It's not really an issue about knowing that they're there, but more so like having enough units afterwards to clean up. So having the Overseer lag behind a little bit is actually pretty good, because then it stays alive. If it stays in the front, then there's potential for it to be maybe killed off before the engagement even happens, and then Zerg really doesn't know how to or Zerg really can't clean it up. And some potential side effects from the air upgrades combining the upgrades. So right now in TVT, mech vs bio opens bio in one or two tanks and then straight into air. So since mech naturally gets late upgrades, it could actually be said that this upgrade could benefit Terran bio in TVT mech vs bio, instead of the other way around, because Terran bio wants to transition to air really fast.
So I guess for the first question of Overseer speed, the area that we think is problematic in TVZ right now is the very late game, where there's a lot of engagements back and forth. So it's pretty common in Terran versus Zerg, where Terran just sets up in a forward location and has multiple skirmishes over and over with the Zerg player. So I do agree, if you put like all those units in the same control group and just move into it, then obviously the Overseers will go up to the front a little more, but we believe that's something that players can get used to. But what this change helps, I think, is when you are trying to retreat, Terran Marines stim in, kill your Overseers, and now you're forced to rebuild not only the Zerglings, Banelings, but also the Overseers, which we believe might be a little too much. But with that said, we don't really know how much of an issue this actually is. So this is just one of the changes that we're trying. And other options on the table right now are possible, say like Ultralisk health buff to help out Zerg in the late game in that specific scenario. Or maybe even go something like changing how Blinding Cloud works, so that Blinding Cloud can counter Widow Mines. So it would reduce the range of Widow Mines to 1 also. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking on in that area. And as far as Terran versus Terran is concerned, yeah, I do agree it's going to buff both bio play and mech play a little bit. But I think the ratio of Bio versus Mech in that matchup is not bad right now. It's in a decent place. So because we're both buffing both areas in that matchup, we believe it's not going to have too much of an impact, and hopefully we won't have. I mean, but these things are. I mean, this is the reason why we need the balance test map, I think, to actually really test these theories. So, yeah.
CatZ, do you have any questions or responses to any of those?
Yeah, I think the overseer change is fine. I mean, it's way slower than mutas or links, so I don't think what Xenocider was saying is going to be true at all. I think that it's fine, and it might help a little bit. I don't know if it's going to be game breaking, so I agree with David Kim there. Questions I have are about the Viper. What exactly are you trying to do with the Viper? Like, what are you trying to quote unquote fix here?
So, like I said before, I think we believe that Zerg might be a little weak in the late game, mostly against Terran, but also a little bit against Protoss also. And the reason why we think that is because when we watch WCS Season 2, Zerg is definitely underperforming in those tournaments. And this might just be a temporary thing, or it might be a long-term thing. So we just want to be prepared with a series of changes if they are needed down the line. So for the Viper, the main reason is because we believe Vipers were really fun at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm before players kind of found the counters to them. And the Roach Hydra Viper, to be more specific, that strat was really fun. So we were kind of looking for a change to the Viper that brings that strategy back a little bit more so than how much they're being used right now. But that's not really the only option, and I think we can just keep exploring. But right now, that's just the test. That's just the change that we're testing in the balance test map.
Okay, because as far as CVP goes, I think that the Viper timings are still really strong. A lot of the times the Protoss has to, to defend the Viper timing, they either have to have too few units on High Templars or no High Templars.
Yeah.
So I think that speeding up the process by like a minute might make it so that those timing attacks are way too strong. And I think the Viper is already pretty strong in the mid game. I was actually talking to Snoot about this, and he also agreed. So I was just wondering what stage in the game you feel like the Viper is not as viable as it should be. Have you considered buffing the range in which, or the like how fast they consume instead?
So as far as that timing is concerned, we totally agree, and we think that's one of the main focus points that we need to be testing on this balance test map. And as far as the faster consume goes, I don't think their weakness is in the turnaround. Like, for example, we've seen games where Vipers are just constantly using consume, going back to battle, using their spells, and then that process being repeated. That break, I think, is at a pretty edge case right now. Like, if we speed that up even more, I think we might be in a place where it just feels like Vipers are just using spells like almost unlimitedly. So I think that's probably not the best place to go as far as changes are concerned. But if this current one doesn't work for the reason you say, then I think we can either look at different numbers for the Viper or just look at a completely different unit altogether.
Yeah, or what about, say, making Blinding Cloud last a second or two longer instead of...
that would be good.
Those would be pretty good changes because it doesn't have like momentum changes like the faster consume does.
Yeah. Todd, do you have any opinions on that? I mean, it's obviously, I think it would affect, the Viper change would affect the ZVP matchup a lot, I think.
Yeah, I think CatZ said it pretty well. I think right now the Viper with Roaches and Hydralisks hitting some timing very early on is very, very strong. And having the Viper start with full energy, it really worries me that these kind of timings will be even stronger. We haven't seen that much Viper, I feel, in the matchup. Usually used with Roaches and Hydralisks, unless sometimes you see Hyun in tournament playing it. We've seen it more with the Swarm Host style, with which I don't think it will change too much because, I mean, when you have Swarm Host, you're not really about to die anyway, so it's really about Roach, Hydralisk, and Viper. I think on some map like Newkirk, Precinct, or just like very open maps in general, if Zerg start playing a lot more with saturating 3 bases, starting to pump out Roaches, and then they throw down the Hydralisk den, and then they start a Hive, like Hyun does when he does it, they can hit some very, very early timing with 3 Vipers. That's going to be very, very hard for any Protoss to hold, especially in an open field. So on some maps, if Zerg start doing this and Vipers start with full energy, I think it might be quite broken, but it's still maybe a little bit too early to say, because it still feels like a new unit, the Viper. It's not been exploited to its full potential, and Protosses have not been doing the best job either of getting Templars early enough, or putting in the best effort to scout it very early to try and counter it. So I'm not sure right now whether or not it will be good, but I have to say it worries me a little bit as a Protoss.
Yeah, I think those are good points.
If I had a question, sorry, is the Viper being changed mostly for the Zerg versus Terran, or are you taking into account also the Protoss versus Zerg? And if yes, how exactly are you going about it?
So I think part of it is the second thing that you said, which is Viper is not being explored that much by Zerg players, and Viper buff, I think, kind of pushes Zerg players to explore that space a little more, right? So because it's not a unit that we've seen so much of, say like Marines or Widowmines in TVZ are seen in every single game, so we know a lot more about that unit compared to something that's used less. So I think that's the main goal for it, especially for the balance test map. And I think we just have to see how the games go, right? Like in terms of the timing, maybe 200 is not enough, or maybe 200 is too much. Maybe we have to go 100 starting energy or 150 starting energy, and so on. There's different numbers that we can tweak to account for the timing rush buffs. But I think the answer to your question is we just have to see where this takes us. And obviously, this is a buff in both matchups, not just Zerg versus Terran. So, yeah, I think that's where we're at right now with the Viper.
Okay, Suppy, you got any questions for him?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I think the way that Blizzard has been designing and balancing this game has been a lot better than I think their approach to Wings of Liberty. So I've been pretty pleased with it. Like, we've been doing a lot more buffs to units rather than nerfs, which I think makes the game a lot more dynamic, and a big reason why Heart of the Swarm is more entertaining for people than Wings of Liberty became. And also, I think, it's really hard to kind of like theory craft how these balance changes are actually going to affect the game, like while we're just sitting here. But in regards to the Overseer change and the Viper change, Overseer change I think is pretty good. It's a very mild buff. It's something that is going to slightly benefit Zergs, but I think TVZ on the whole is already a pretty balanced matchup, so I think that the fact that it's not a huge change is pretty good. And I think the biggest thing, like Lebo was talking earlier about how the Overseers might get too far ahead, I think the biggest thing for me is when I'm Mutalisk harassing or doing stuff like that, a lot of times I can't actually go in because I can't see Widow Mines, but I think if the Mutalisks are at the same speed, or at least if the Overseers can kind of keep up with the Mutalisks, I can at least harass a little bit better when there's Widow Mines. So I think that's a pretty good change. The Viper change, like Paulo said, I think it is buffing sort of the mid-game timing that's already sort of strong with Zerg. And I know David said that he wanted to make it more viable late game, but I'm just wondering, even with the energy buff, I feel like it's going to be kind of difficult for Zerg to use, because I feel like the biggest problem with the Vipers in late game is that once there are High Templars out on the field, it becomes very difficult to use Vipers because they always get feedback. So I was wondering if there's any alternative. I feel like even if they do have energy, they're still going to be hard to use late game because of the feedback that kind of hard counters them, at least in my opinion.
I don't think that's totally true. I think there's a dance between the Vipers and the High Templars that most people don't care to do. But the High Templar has to be in the front of their army in order to feedback, pretty much. It's the same range and pretty much the same casting speed. So I think most Zerg players just run in and try to abduct whatever they can. But sometimes you gotta get rid of the Templars first, and they're really weak.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I'll open it up. Anybody else have any other questions in regards to the recent upgrades? I mean, I think we kind of went through them all. So why don't we transition to the next part, which is going to be just general design questions you might have for David. And I'll start it off with asking you, David, about your past I guess your past appearance on State of the Game and just some other quotes I've seen from you that where some of the changes that you've been trying to implement into Heart of the Swarm, you guys have been wanting to change, is just adding more aggressive play. And I think we've seen that, right, with upgrading the speeds of the War Prism and mutas and medevacs and everything. Do you think what you were trying to accomplish with that has been the result, and are you going to continue doing that?
Yeah, I think we're in the right direction, but I don't think we're completely there yet in every single matchup. Like, for example, Protoss doesn't have a lot of tools to just be constantly under aggression. The recent, I think, War Prism buffs have been really good in terms of that. And we've been getting a lot of pro player feedbacks and Terran players saying they lost the timing to push out against Protoss because of the War Prism buff, stuff like that, which we don't necessarily agree with fully because we do see Terran players pushing out. And another, I think, popular thing is due to Photon Overcharge, Terran players just have nothing to do in the early game. But, I mean, in my opinion, I think it's pretty common. I mean, I was talking to Polt about it just last weekend, and that's what he said. And then I said to him, but in the game that you played just yesterday or the day before, I've seen you just go in with a bunch of Marauders and Marines early before even the Medivacs came out, and he was just pressuring and killing probes through the Photon Overcharge. And then he sort of agreed that, yeah, maybe it's not so all or nothing, and maybe there is still room to be aggressive even through the Photon Overcharge and so on. So I think it's just something that we need to really work at, mostly because more aggression means each matchup played even by the same players, even on the same maps, there's going to be more diversity, I think. And that, I think, is what makes the game fun to watch for viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. Xenocider, I know one of the biggest topics from a lot of the comments I was getting on the Reddit thread was basically a TVP matchup, right? And David, you alluded to it just now with the poll comment there. Xenocider, how do you feel about the early game TVP and Mothership Cores and Photon Overcharge and everything?
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna say that Polt did do damage with his Marauder Marine Force, and that was very nice, but that is a very special scenario. There are very few cases, unless the Protoss just cuts an absurd amount of corners, that you can actually do damage through the Mothership Core expand. Like, basically what happens right now is the Mothership Core expand allows Protoss to get a slight advantage, and then if Terran just plays like standard Widow Mine drop into 3 racks, that kind of stuff, then that slight snowball advantage will allow them to basically completely take dominance over the game. And that is an issue kind of in standard play, but more so, I feel like what a lot of Terran players really don't like about the matchup right now is that Protoss basically owns it. Like, Protoss can open like Proxy Oracle, 4-gate Blink all-in. These all-ins might not be good, no, not good, but they might not work like every time. They might be like 50% win rate builds. There's 2-base all-ins, like Immortal Bus, Blink Stalker all-ins, like, but as a Terran player, I can't actually think of any builds that are even comparable to the 4-gate Blink all-in off 1 base right now. Like, Photon Overcharge has the same range as a tank right now, so basically there are special scenarios where the Protoss will cut like 1 corner too many and you'll have a slight timing window, but you have to commit to the build that would exploit that timing before you know that they're going to cut that corner. Like, it's just very rare where you can punish them. And then this has recently forced most Terrans in Korea to open 3CC, which I feel is a good build, but it's not perfect right now, and I also feel like it doesn't make the game funner to watch. Like, it's almost literally going back to Wings of Liberty meta, where Tasia used to open 3CC every single game, and what ended up happening is that you go into a mid game where like no action has happened for the first like 10 or 12 minutes, like maybe a few pokes, but nothing really, and then like there's one big engagement and the game ends. So I feel like the biggest options right now is that Terran has to commit to a build that punishes the Mothership Core being too greedy without knowing that they're actually going to play too greedy, and also that Protoss having the Mothership Core expand allows them to have a lot of options outside of just playing standard, whereas Terran doesn't have that. And finally, the 3CC is probably the best TVP build right now, but it still has holes versus certain all-ins. that, yeah.
So what do you think? What do you say to all that, David? I mean, that was a lot. That was a lot right there.
I think you're very good at analyzing like the specifics, which and a lot of the points I totally agree with. But I think just looking at the big picture, I think we can't really say that Terran is underperforming against Protoss. So just look at Season 2 WCS, for example. The strongest region, I would say, is Korea, and I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that. And the in top 4, 3 of them were actually Terran players, and Terran actually ended up winning against Protoss in the finals. So I don't think that's the case, but with that said, if there is room to nerf, say, like the photon overcharge, because like you say, it is kind of preventing some aggressive play early on. If we do have that room to nerf, I think that would be good to do. But right now, I don't think we can just nerf it just because there's no aggression, because the balance of that matchup is actually pretty decent. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just
Okay.
I just want to
That's
address.
fine.
I want to address that because a lot of people are talking about the fact that Protoss basically isn't winning anything, right? Like, if Terran is doing so bad, then why is Protoss getting completely shut down in OSL and stuff, right? So this actually goes back.
Depends on where you look at,
There's
though,
like
right?
there's like a ton of
Europe
Protoss in the
versus
WCS.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I
WCS
mean-
Korea, like
Okay.
in the finals, basically in the top 4, there's 3 Terrans, but every Terran is
Yeah,
complaining about
sure.
Protoss, right? So why is that? Okay, so basically, if we actually go back into the context of WCS Korea round of 32, like, I am the biggest nerd in the game. I watch every single one of these Terran games, and I'll be the first to tell you that I feel like Terran is the best race when the metagame is constantly switching. Like, over the course of WCS Season 2, you guys instated a patch for Hellbats, and that is when... Alright, so basically, Terran started going Hellbats a lot in TVP, and then right when that got shut down, they immediately switched back. So Protoss is best when they're in a really comfortable environment, like maybe a sustained 1 or 2 months of figuring everything out, and strategies were just basically constantly shifting at that point, where Protoss really couldn't figure out a good mix. Like, basically, like, if you watched First play against Fantasy, like, First was already getting the hold of how to hold Hellbat basically perfectly, and then right after that they switched it up, and then Terran switched it up, and also
Well, we gotta make
Terran-
this shorter, man. Come on.
yeah, okay, no, alright, I'll just leave it there. I mean,
Okay.
I have a lot of stuff to say, but yeah.
Yeah, let me give some of the other guys a chance. So Todd, response to any of that, or
I
a,
think,
or a question or a new question for David, either one.
I think Xenocider is like my evil twin. I could give you the exact same speech, just completely the other way around. That's what I usually do. And now listening to him, I'm starting to understand what I sound like when I'm talking about PvT. Except it's just the other way around. So I guess we both have our opinions, and Xenocider seems to think that Terran did not do well in the WCS Korea, or that Protoss did well there. But I saw Terran winning and beating the best Protoss versus Terran in finals, and watching those games, I didn't particularly feel that there was too much that needed to be changed. But I thought the matchup was pretty interesting. It could go into macro games. It did feel like Maru didn't want to let it go to late game, which I can understand because I know it can be tough for Terran. But yeah, the matchup did feel interesting, and we had stuff happening all the time. So overall, I have to say, usually I'm the one to complain a lot that Protoss is bad, or like Terran and Zerg are better. But these days, I've seen a lot of Protosses do decent or well in tournaments, and I've kind of changed my view on balance overall. And I think right now all races can do pretty well. Zerg is underperforming a little bit, but I think even without any patch, this could change dramatically next season. If they start using other stuff in their race. We don't see drop being used much. The style that they were using with Swarm Host still has a lot of potential to go. So yeah, listening to what he was saying here, I just basically realized how I sound usually, and and I cannot now. It feels a little bit weird because like we're like opposites, and it's very hard to find a middle ground on anything. But if I had a question, I guess, for David Kim about Protoss versus Terran, because that's what we're talking about right now, is who do you talk to mostly to try and figure out what to do, and then what matters the most? The very high level games, or like just the what happens in all of the WCS regions in general, or those Korea matter more? Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so I think one of the people that I talk to the most is actually you, which is kind of funny that you asked.
I can tell you've changed this guy.
But I think it kind of changes over time because some pro players are more aggressive about giving feedback when, say, like they're doing better. Some are more aggressive about it when they're doing a little worse, and so on. So I think it kind of changes. But I think the last, say, like few weeks, I've been talking a lot with people like Todd, MC, Polt, DRG, Parting, and I am the team manager of IM. I think IM is really strong in that their team really has a really good mix of really top level players of all races. So I would ping him a lot in terms of just helping to test our balance test maps. And I think overall, not just pros, but my favorite people to talk to in the community, I think, are people like Engine, Artosis, or Apollo, because I think they have a really good grasp and they're a little less biased than I think everyone's biased to some degree, but I think they're a lot less biased than a lot of the pro players because obviously pro players play one race. They have to win games. So
Is there this David Kim list of feedback, players and Artcast to get feedback from, or is it literally pretty random when you run into people at events?
so I think it's a mix of everything. Sometimes I try to contact people. So for example, one of the top Kespa Terran players has mentioned in his interview, say like a month ago, that he wanted to talk to me. So I reached out to him and asked for feedback, and I'm still waiting for feedback from him. And other times it's players contacting us directly, whether it's contacting me or our community team or our esports team. But I think it's a mix of everything.
Okay. Kat, got any design questions, comments
No.
for David? No.
If
Seriously?
anything pops up, I'll interrupt.
Okay. Suppy.
All right, yeah, I got a couple questions, I guess, regarding the design of the game. So kind of two questions. One is is there any really, I just wanted to ask what David's thoughts are in regards to units that kind of are, I guess I would just say they're kind of like boring in skills do. For example, the Corruptor, I think, is a very, very boring unit.
Mhm.
Its spell is not exciting to watch. It has basically just an A move function. Sort of the same with the Void Ray. It's kind of just like hit a button and like all your units do more damage. So I was wondering if there's any way or any like solutions that you guys were thinking of in regards to making more units more exciting. Like, say, the Void Ray had like some kind of spell that was interesting and created interactions between the players that both sides had to micro, stuff like that.
So I'd say first, not every single unit has to be like the Widow Mine or like the Marine in terms of micro potential, because the game, I think certain units that have a lot of micro potential stand out because of some of the more units that you can't really micro well, such as Zealots or Roaches or so on, right? And second, what you're saying is totally true, I think, about the Corruptor especially. And it is something that we talk about a lot, but we believe design changes and unit role changes are for expansions, not for balance patches. Yeah, it's something that we will definitely consider in Void development, for example, but it's not something that we can address in a patch.
Mm-hmm. So on that point, as you said, like the bigger changes are kind of for the expansions, right? And there's actually one thing that I've always been a huge proponent of. I'm not sure if you saw it, but there's this thing called dynamic unit movement.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a thread on Team Liquid. It was basically how the units would kind of spread themselves out a little bit instead of being in a huge death clump. And I feel like it would really increase the skill cap of the game and also make the battles last longer, because one thing I've really noticed is when watching Brood War, you can tell that the battles last like minutes at a time, whereas in StarCraft 2 they're kind of short because all the units are so close together. And I know that's like such a huge change, like just changing the way that units path and stuff,
Right.
but I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, I don't know if you've seen that thread, but I thought it was a very interesting one.
Yeah, I do think it's a pretty big change, but it's not something we can't test for example, say like the beta of the expansion. But With that said, I agree. Maybe the battles might last longer, but I'm not sure if I totally agree with the first statement, which was it would make StarCraft more skill based, and that I think could be the opposite right now because the difference between a player that's able to split out his whole army versus someone who can't is very big. Whereas if we automatically do that for you, then is that kind of decreasing the value of the players who are able to pull off that kind of micro or macro.
Yeah, and you would have
Yeah.
to change the whole AOE, like all the AOE spells.
That's right.
But that, I
It's
mean,
balanced
that's one of the
around it,
arguments
too.
that,
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the arguments I thought was really good because
Mhm.
if you change how the units are spread out, you can buff AOE a lot, and that makes it really, really exciting because, for example, we can compare Storm from Brood War, where it's like, oh, he hit that
Yeah.
storm, everything under the storm is going to die. It's really exciting to watch. Whereas Storm in StarCraft 2 is a lot more mild because it can't be that strong. Otherwise, the entire army would die in like one storm. So I think in that way you could make more exciting spells that have the potential to do more damage and be more exciting to watch as well.
Yeah, I think that's true, but at the same time, I think I've seen games where storms just totally ended the games, especially in
Yeah.
Protoss versus Terran matchups. So yeah, maybe we can go a little stronger there, but maybe there's a better way to go. Like for example, one of the values that we have is we try to make the smallest changes possible that have the biggest impact. So if we can find a way to kind of increase those fun moments with smaller changes, maybe that's a better way to go about solving that specific problem.
So, quick question for you, David, about mech, because a lot of people are asking about mech. What are your current thoughts and opinions on the current state of mech? Because you touched on it in TVT, but you haven't said anything else about it in the other two matchups.
Obviously, we don't think it's as good as Bio in the other two matchups.
Yeah.
Mech, I think, is an area we wanted to improve in HOTS, but we haven't really fulfilled that goal. And right now, because there's so many tournaments going on around the world, and pro players' careers depend on it, we can't really easily go in and just make drastic fixes. But at the same time, I think what we can do is we can, over time, use the balance test map or a series of balance test maps to try out different changes. And if something feels really solid, if something feels needed, or if it feels safe enough to do in a live game, then we'll definitely make a move towards that. And the first step of doing that, I think, is the current changes that are proposed in the balance test map. So I think just the more pro players and more just players overall across all skill levels trying out that change and giving us feedback, I think, is really important.
Okay. So I had a question about maps before we kind of move on to the other part. So balancing with maps, right? It's a very difficult thing. It's almost like a moving target type of thing. And I know you've mentioned semi-recently that maps are super important when it comes to your job. So I kind of have a dialogue with the map community too, and they've always felt kind of restricted. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, as the balancer, do you feel like it has to be restricted to some type of parameters at this point to be able to actually balance the game? Otherwise, it's just every map is a completely different game altogether.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, and obviously because, for example, right, like a super extreme example to that would be, what if I make a 4v4 map where one of the players start in our base, like surrounded by the three of us, right? So there has to be restrictions, and the restrictions become more and more, I think, for 1v1 because it is an esport, because it's meant to be played in tournaments. But I find map balance is a little easier than game balance, because if a map is totally imbalanced, then we can just cut the map and bring in something new to try.
Yeah.
And I think the main goal for us and tournaments in terms of maps is to bring as much diversity as possible, as much variety as possible without hurting the game. And we have systems in place to try out new maps, which I think is cool, because tournaments have the veto system where players can veto maps. The ladder has... you can veto 3 maps on the ladder, stuff like that. So I think what we need to do is pick out the maps that do look really fair, yet very different from each other, and try those maps, but if they ever turn out bad, then it's easier to just cut and replace with a brand new map. And I think we have a lot of talented map makers out there, both in terms of Blizzard, as well as tournaments, as well as their community. So I think we have a lot of maps to choose from. So this area, I feel, is a little easier.
Okay, so you're pretty happy with just the map dynamics right now, just the amount of new maps coming in and just the turnover, or no?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like season 2, we had a bunch of new maps. Some didn't work as well as others. I think one example is Red City. That map didn't turn out that great, and we saw that easily because of how many players were vetoing that map. So we took that out for season 3. And in season 3, our current plan is to bring in 3 new maps. I think we made a post on this a couple weeks back. And try a completely aligned pool of 7 maps in ladder as well as all 3 regions. So if that turns out okay, then we can go from there. If not, then we can always make improvements, because I think nothing is perfect and everything can use improvements going forward.
Okay, good stuff. All right, I'll open it up. Anybody else have anything they want to just jump in with?
I just have something really random.
Go for it. Go for it.
What do you think if Medevac speed boost got a buff, but
What?
the turn rate is reduced, and when you speed boost, it can only go in a straight line? I feel like it'd be really fun. It'd be like, it would be a buff, but it'd also be a nerf, because it would take skill. You'd have to like turn it. It would go. It would be like really slow, and you have to like time it really well. I don't know. I think that'd be really cool.
It sounds like
That's
a
just
pretty crazy change. But I think in terms of Medevac speed boost, judging as how fast players are adjusting to that speed buff. For example, at the beginning of Heart of the Storm, pretty much every player that's not Terran was complaining about that
Yes.
buff. Whereas now, Zerg players don't have that much trouble. Protoss players have not as much trouble that they did back in the day. So what's kind of interesting to think about is maybe a year from now, if Zerg players and Protoss players are even more efficient at blocking medevac drops, maybe we do have to buff, just straight up. I'm not saying to do that right now. I'm just saying it's just something that's kind of interesting to think about.
Okay, I got something actually. Are you happy with the Hellbat nerf?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
has it had the results that you were
ridiculous.
expecting? I mean, you just don't see it as much, period. Right? So it's like one of those changes that just makes a unit disappear.
I think in terms of Hellbat drops, I think that was a good change.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a strategy that you could do a lot with if you're a much better Terran player. But in terms of just not seeing him play in, say, like Terran versus Protoss, that's an area that we're looking at, and we definitely want Hellbats to see play, especially in the late game against mass charge zealots.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not turning out to be the case, then yeah, maybe we need to make a move in that area.
How about like transformation servos, which is something we see in like 0% of all games? Is there any?
Yeah, I saw that feedback also. I think it's a great idea, but
You
at
okay?
the same time,
What is that exactly?
what
It's a
happened?
Hellbat transformation.
Oh, transformation. Got it.
Yeah, it's a great change, but like I said, like 20 minutes ago, we do think Terran versus Protoss is in a pretty good place right now,
Yeah.
and we don't want to just make changes that could potentially alter that at this moment.
Okay, so I said I had a last one, but there's always like another one, right? Are there any thoughts? So one general, I think, general thing that's been talked about for ages now is really just the design of Protoss, right? Just around force field, around warp gate, and all that business, and how it's limiting just to even your job designing around that core premise. Are there any thoughts or any talks of changing the game drastically at all for Legacy of the Void? Since you have to wait till that. Of course, you can't update Heart of the Swarm with something crazy like that, but are there any talks of really, really changing it drastically?
So we don't really see force fields as limiting to the design. We actually think it's one of the
okay.
coolest abilities, mostly because like a really amazing Protoss player using force fields, you can really see the skill, and even like your worst level, like lowest level of average viewers, even those players can really tell what's going on exactly and why Protoss has an advantage. Like all those things are really clear as also. So we think force fields are one of the better abilities, new abilities in the game. But with that said, your second question, we do have plans to potentially try some really drastic changes. So, for example, one of the things that was brought up in last week's meeting was someone said Terran has been really bio-focused throughout Wings, and it's looking like the case in Heart of the Storm also. Do we need to change that up somehow, whether it's like big Starmies being stronger or mech being stronger, whether like what the solution is aside, like do we just need to change that up just for the sake of changing it up because yeah, it's a fun strat, but it's just been around for too long. So these are the discussions that we are having right now, and I don't know what the answer is right now, but we are definitely in talks of what to do in the next expansion.
Okay, so at the very least open to changing it drastically. That's good. That's cool. All right, well, let's transition into the next part, which was really the process, kind of the original reason why I wanted to have you on, David. And everybody thinks that you've talked about the process, and honestly, the only thing that we really know as a community is there's just really high level things that you talk to players and casters, that you have some type of stats, win-loss stats on just various situations in tournaments and maps and all that business. And then somehow you come up with a solution, and then we roll it to the beta servers, and then depending how that goes, it gets rolled, right? So what I want to know is like the specifics, and hopefully you can share that with us. So I would like to use something as a use case. I was going to talk about maybe just the recent proposed changes, kind of use that as a use case as to kind of beginning of it. So talk to us about stats. So when you're retrieving stats, what are the tools that you use? I mean, is it purely your whole team just watching a bunch of matches and just like, just jotting down and then coming together in a meeting and telling each other about it? Or do you actually have some sophisticated analytics tools?
So I think we have a mix of a lot of things. So like data is a good example. So our BI team actually gathers data across all skill levels on the ladder, as well as we just recently improved the way we gather data at the highest skill level. So what we used to do is we used to pick like a percentage of, like if you're at a top X percentage, then we pull your data and we say that's the highest level ladder data. But now we went deeper and we check the quality of the matches. So say a really awesome player like Innovation plays against like a lower master level player, maybe we don't count that match. Whereas if two pro level players played, we count those matches. So now we pick out the data by the number of highest quality matches per region. So we look at that on a regular basis. Like you said, we get feedback from our community, from our pro players. We do also watch a lot of games, and internally we have several different groups that help out with the whole process. So we have like the balance team, our design team. We recently started like analysis team, and this team goes in and watches replays in a more in-depth scenario. So using
are these people very skilled at the game?
So some are very skilled, some are skilled at analyzing, some are skilled in game design. So we have we feel like we have a very good mix of people from different disciplines contributing in these groups. And there's a lot of overlap too, right? For me, for example, I'm in all those groups. And we just have a lot of discussions, and we do watch games together. And I think in the end, it comes down to how well we analyze versus how well we can theorize proposed changes, as well as just seeing a big, clear view. So, for example, what we do in our analysis group is we go in and we say, these are the reasons why this happened at the end. So, like, for example, right, like, there are a lot of situations where it looks like one person got a huge edge in a fight, but that may not necessarily be the case. And I think a good example to that is, say a bunch of banelings roll into an SCV line and wipes out the whole line. But what if Zerg players used over 10 banelings only to kill, say, like 16 workers? Then is that really a Zerg favoring trade? Probably not, right? So we get down to these specifics, but at the same time, what we do at the end of these meetings is we say, how does that apply to the big picture? And I think
Okay. So a lot of it isn't based on data. I mean, it's not based on data that's automatically extracted. It's actually based on a lot of people. I mean,
I think it's a mix of data. What happens in highest level games, like the quality of the games, as well as a lot of our judgments on what's going on. And I don't think it can just be based off of data, because if we say, okay, the data says Zerg is winning 60% of the time, we don't really know what the problem is. And it's not just about the win percentages, but it's also about how fun is the game to watch. So because of that, I think all these things have to come together. So it's a very complicated process, I think.
Yeah, I mean the fun part absolutely has a lot to do with design. I was just more curious about how, how I guess what kind of method I guess the data was being collected. And so part of your team, I mean, I would think that you would be having some pro players or former pro players be part of this team. I mean, I know you're really good at the game. I mean, I know you're a random GM, but I feel like the whole team should be very, very skilled at the game to have these people analyzing it properly.
We feel like we do have pro players in our community as part of the team, because I think the biggest parts of it is our community feedback as well as our pro player feedback. And what those two things do is kind of give us those really highest level. And that's why I think we reach out to pro players specifically to test out new changes, because there's only so much like theorizing we can do. And in the end, like at the end of the day, you really need to see what's exactly going on in the actual pro level games. And for that, I think we heavily use the pro players, and I totally agree. But as far as, wait, so are you saying our team should be all pro players?
Or at least the people in analyzing the games. I feel like they should be at least at that level of skill. I mean, to be able to properly, properly conclude and make certain conclusions from watching a game.
I personally disagree with that a little bit, because, like, for example, my personal favorite out of, and the most helpful person within our StarCraft 2 community, I believe, is Engine. He has been ever since the beginning of Wings of Liberty. And he is not like a pro level player. He plays random. He plays at Master League, but if he had to go up against, say, like, Innovation, I can't really see him.
Well, I'm not saying they have to be relevant pro, but most of the time, a lot of the analysts at once played the game or were players at a high level. Just for instance, like me, I watch a ton of games. I like to analyze stuff too. But if I'm sitting here talking to Paulo's going to know a crap load more than he always knows like that extra little bit that I don't. And
I think the skill there's a lot of overlap in analyzing games versus playing games well, but they're not. They don't go like so hand in hand that if I'm a good player, then I'm also good at analyzing. If you just look around to different pro players, a lot of them are really helpful, but you do also see pro players who are just that just don't get it, and that just think their race is underpowered no matter what, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I think there is some overlap, like you say, but I don't think it's like you have to have this to have the other, and vice versa. I think you can be really good at analyzing games, but not be a top level player. But like I said before, we do have a good representation of people that are really skilled at playing the game versus people that are really good at analyzing the game. So I think the mix that we have, supported by the community feedback, supported by the pro level feedback, I think is very strong right now. And like Suppy mentioned at the beginning of the show, I think that really shows in Heart of the Swarm, because our balance, we feel, is a lot stronger in Heart of the Swarm compared to Wings of Liberty.
So transitioning from the analysis side to the designing side, actually coming up with solutions.
I have an unrelated question.
Okay, go for it, CatZ.
Is there anything you're planning to fix the barcodes ever?
That's a good one.
We definitely want to. It's not fun for us when we see a bunch of barcodes on the Korean ladder, GM ladder, but it's just not an easy. The most popular suggestion that we get to solve that problem is they say, don't reveal. So say, for example, like one solution that we suggested to the pro players that are using barcodes was, what if we had you anonymous on the loading screen, and we said you don't show match history, then would you use it? And a lot of pro players are saying yes, but me thinking about it from a pro player's angle is it's still safer to just barcode, I think, if my goal is to not let anyone know who I am. And mostly because, especially in Korea, everyone plays, a lot of the pros play on their pro teams. So by the play style, I can still I can still gauge who it was, or like there are still methods to figuring out who that player is. So the more I can do to hide myself, the better. So I'm not really sure if that even solves it. So I think it's just an ongoing discussion, but it is an area that we want to fix.
But how's that
But
different?
what
How is not anonymous? I mean, just like making your name anonymous and hiding your build any different
Well,
than
then it would show on the ladder rankings.
I see what you mean.
So there are ways to just pick at it. So the more you can hide, I think the better is the
It's the
is
ladder.
answer,
Okay,
right?
got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Imagine you enabled unique username.
Yeah, why not?
I think this could help a lot.
That just makes sense. Period. I
And
mean,
you just-
I think it's
To
just
just take away names that people have been using for like 3 years. I mean, that's also another discussion, right? Like
Yeah.
if I've been Todd for 3 years, just because you're more famous than me, do you get to keep it? Like,
Yeah.
is that
First come, first serve.
It's
I think
kind of always been like
highest
that,
bidder.
right?
Highest
You
bidder.
could use a few special characters so you can be, I don't know, Dash Todd instead. or
XMG
something.
Todd, right?
Yeah. Or if I just want to be Todd. I mean, yeah, I think it's a separate discussion though, compared to the initial one.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I could go on with the process, but I think that really we should probably do it more another time. Any of you guys got anything else for David here?
Yeah.
We still got about 10 minutes, so
With the latest patch suggestions and changes, we've seen Zerg and Terrence units being involved, but not Protoss. So I have a question for you: do you have any plans yet? What's next for Protoss? Is there anything in the works already, or do you just for now focus on the changes that you've talked about, and then later on you'll think about Protoss and talk about it publicly?
So I don't think it's a matter of these races got these buffs, so this other race should get a buff, but it's more so about what the current state of the game is. And right now, I think Protoss is in a good spot. I don't think it's overpowered like you guys are seeing in Europe, but I could be wrong too, right? This could change next week or the week after. So we don't really have plans for changing Protoss, whether it's a nerf or a buff, anytime soon. And we really want to focus on the 3 changes, as well as some of the things that I mentioned in the show about our direction with Zerg. We want to really focus on those things.
Okay.
What if we added a skill shot to the Viper pool? Wouldn't that be sick?
Yeah, I think that solves everything. Nah, I'm just kidding. Skill shots we always talk about, but it's really difficult to do because say you have 5 Vipers selected, right? Which skill shot goes? There's questions like that need to be solved. So
yeah.
for a game like All Stars, that's okay because you only control 1 unit. But for a game like StarCraft 2, I think it's a much bigger discussion, and it's not something that we can just put in. Like I said before, we try not to put in role changes or design changes into a patch. So even if we did something like that, it would be more for the expansion.
Are there any
People
other
in
units that
chat-
you? Oh, go ahead, Katz.
I was just gonna say people in chat are spamming region lock. So
No, that's a different discussion, guys. Not with David, unfortunately. But any specific units you're working on right now? Like, well, actually, if you were to look at your list of priorities and concerns right now, what's at the top?
I think you guys see that with our balanced test map. Like we try to be as open as possible, whether it's us posting about what we're looking at or whether we put out a balanced test map. But we like there's no secrets going on, I guess is the answer to that question.
Okay, sure.
We try to be as open as possible. So if you just look at our forums and just our blue posts, I think that's always easy to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. He's Davey on there for anybody who doesn't know, for whatever reason, if you're hiding under a rock.
What do you think about the idea of having a unified ladder again? I mean, I think the downside of it is that 2 servers basically have huge delay, right? Is that why it's not being implemented? The one huge ladder, just like it was in HOTS beta.
No, I think it's because there is no way to tell how someone is if they've never played against anyone on that server. Right?
Huh?
What do you mean by how someone is?
Like we can't have like a global ladder because we can't just take players that never play. So say if we were to unify Korea and US,
Mm-hmm.
Korean server players who are playing on the Korean server don't really play with players from the US, so we can't really unify it. I mean, I think it's just like a bad
Oh, you're talking about more
I'm
of
an
a
expert
okay.
of
Just
it.
not,
Yeah, yeah.
not get matched
I-
against each
Yeah,
other.
yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have to have like a server in between, like in Hawaii or something. That-
Hawaii server.
okay.
I was
okay.
wondering more about like the design like the design process. Like, I don't know. I know you did mention about talking to pros for feedback and stuff, but I feel like personally I've never, really been in the discussion. This is kind of the first time for me
Yeah,
that I've
and
ever.
this is one of the reasons I picked these guys is because I don't, except for Todd. Actually, I didn't know you talked to Todd so much until now. But I thought it would be really nice to get like Suppy and CatZ and even Xeno here in front of you and talking to you. But
I do feel like it's always cool to just improve and talk to more people, more pro players in general. So because Todd has my contact info, I think we can spread that around and just get more discussions going offline.
time to post on Reddit, man.
His home address.
What's on it, right?
Exactly. Last question for me at least. Concerning Warpgate, are there any thoughts on Warpgate or thinking about changing it or how it affects the design of Protoss right now?
We think there's like cool things about the Warpgate and some negatives, as with all things. But right now, I don't think is a good time to do a complete redesign or but yeah, like we do see feedback on that area. We do notice the positives and negatives of everything in the game. So and yeah, but it's just not an area that we can act on anytime soon.
I have another crazy suggestion.
Do it.
If it's okay. Obviously, this would be something maybe that could be incorporated in Legacy of the Void when you do those bigger changes. But I think it'd be really interesting if Warpgate was changed from something that's kind of just like this is what you get this every matchup, into something that has like a cost benefit like trade-off, where it's like I could stick with just regular gateways if they were somehow a little bit better than warp gates, and then in certain situations I could switch it to warp gates when I need them and kind of make like an interesting dynamic there, and it becomes really like a decision, like it's actually a player decision rather than just everybody gets warp gates.
Or a strategy decision, right? Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
It actually works in one map where you get unlimited money. You actually want gateways so that you can,
Yeah, I know.
you don't miss the warp ins.
Right.
As far as like high level design goes for that, I think it would be cool that if it's a choice, but at the same time, I think what's not cool about that is then how Protoss produces units becomes same as how Terran players produce their units. I think that will be the downside. But I do think the positive would be what you say.
Yeah, just have maybe very corner case situations where you would want just regular warp gates for whatever reason. Or gateways, sorry, regular gateways for whatever reason. Alright guys, well, I think we're about out of time, so it's pretty much a 1 hour hard stop here for everybody. But wanted to thank David for coming on, climbing the ladder. I think it was really, really great to have you on, and thanks to Blizzard for letting you come on. Of course, it's a pleasure. And obviously all my guest hosts today, Suppy, CatZ, Todd, and Xenocider. I think it's a pretty good show. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. But why don't we do some quick shout outs if you guys have any. We'll start. Why don't we start with you, David?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It was really fun. And I just like to point out we are doing the best job we can. We are working really hard. So please help us out in any way you guys can. Whether it's providing us feedback on the forums or testing the balance test map. Like we really need to test that those changes rather quickly than later, I think. So yeah, thank you.
Let's see, let's just go left. Xenocider, you got any shoutouts?
Well, I just want to say I apologize to David for kind of going on a huge ramble fest earlier. I didn't get much sleep last night because I was on meta really late, so didn't really think that went through. We all make mistakes, and I'd just like to say it was an honor for you to have me on, and yeah.
Todd?
I didn't think it was that bad.
Todd?
Thanks for having me as always. It was interesting discussion. Shout out to my team XMG and Shameless plug, I'm going to be casting the Acer Team Story Cup this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, live from Germany with 4 teams. The week after that, I'm going to be casting the WCS World Finals live from Germany as well. So tune into that. It's going to be some insane games, I think.
Caster and player, crazy man. I don't know how you, how you do that. Suppy?
Thanks for having me on. Just gonna do a quick shout out to my team, Evil Geniuses, and for both me and Xenocider, our sponsors, Monster Energy, Kingston HyperX, right, Razor, Zam, in eProceed, Jinx, XMG. And I'm gonna leave us off with another final question for David. When are you gonna nerf the Artosis curse?
I don't think I can. It's too strong.
Too strong. Cats?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. Thanks to David Kim as well for coming on, and my sponsors, Das Keywords, Twitch, Ibermedia, and TT Sports. You should check them out. And yeah, watch my stream. And people are wondering about skins in the chat now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about that too.
Okay. I forgot. Jacqueline wanted me to ask me. So I'm supposed to ask you, David. How many times have you thought about cars in this show?
Cars?
Yep, cars.
Not once.
Okay, so I can tell Jacqueline that. And is it true that your car looks like the Batmobile?
I don't know. Maybe.
He's got a what car do you get? A Z370, right?
Yes.
The black one. Okay. Yeah. She wanted me to ask that. So, anyways, guys, it's been climbing the ladder for this week. We'll let's see. Next week we'll have possibly DJ Weed on to trying to figure out what type of show. So tune in next week. But for David Kim, Xenocider, Todd, Suppy, Cats, and myself, ChanmanV, we will see you next time. Later.
Okay, guys, I gotta run.